This is table 45. If you've not been here before, table just means we sit around tables and have some food and discussion. And the 45 means we have 45 minutes at the most to make it happen. So it's always a challenge. And I keep the clock behind me. I need to keep moving it ahead of me. So we'll try to not do that. But we're glad you're here today. Feel free to get some donuts if you need some. So we're in this series called The Armor of God. And the first week I did an overview to kind of lead up to chapter 6, which is where the armor of God part is. Last week we talked about the belt of truth. If you're familiar with the armor of God, there's a paper on the front of your table that kind of goes through it. Today we're talking about the breastplate of righteousness. Are you all familiar with this passage? I'm making some assumptions that you've heard it before, but we're all, show of hands, we all read this before? You're familiar with it? Maybe not? Okay. So this is a passage where Paul is talking about armor in a spiritual capacity. He's borrowing imagery from a Roman soldier or the Roman military, and he's taking that imagery and he's applying it to spiritually, that you need to put on this spiritual armor in order to withstand the attacks of the enemy. And Paul is a person who would know about these attacks because his life was one of a Pharisee, and then when he became a Christian, he was under attack constantly. So he saw a lot of attacks from the enemy, and so I think Paul was recognizing, even in his own life, the importance of having armor or having some sort of protection. So if you look on your passage there on this weird sheet, you've never seen a sheet like this probably, but the passage is on the front, so it starts out where he says, "Finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, to stand." And then what we're going to look at today, he says, "Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist," that was last week, "with the breastplate of righteousness in place." So there's two words that Paul's talking about this morning that I want to highlight. One is breastplate, and the other is righteousness. And he combines these concepts together into one. The Greek word for breastplate is called thorax. Have you heard of that before? You've seen that root in some other words that we have. And that armor covers the chest, but it covers the heart, it covers the lungs, it covers the liver, and it covers the stomach and part of the intestines. What I did on this chart is I kind of showed you what a normal piece of armor would cover, and then all the vital organs that it covers, because I think it's important to make that connection of why this breastplate of righteousness matters. The word for righteousness in the Greek can mean a couple things. It can mean moral uprightness, it can mean having a right relationship with God, or it can mean having this covenantal faithfulness. And we're not exactly sure what Paul is exactly saying, because that word can be used in a couple different contexts. So what we have to do is read this letter in the context of it to kind of understand. So Paul was by nationality what? What was he? A Jew, right? We also know that Paul was a citizen of what country? Or what? Rome. It was Rome. He's really unique. Paul's a Jew, but he's also a Roman citizen, which actually bails him out a number of times later on in his life. There was another thing. What did Paul do for a living? Makes tents. All right, makes tents. Maybe I rephrased that wrong. What was he known for? He held a certain esteem in the community. What was he when he became a Christian? Do you know? He was really, really good at being a church leader. Have you heard of the phrase Pharisee? Paul was a Pharisee. Do you know what a Pharisee is? Anyone know what a Pharisee is or was? What do you think? Pharisee is basically an expert in the law. He was like a pastor's pastor. In fact, Paul actually brags about his spiritual resume, because he does this in Philippians chapter 3, where he talks about how good he was. And this is like important for our conversation. He says, if anyone thinks that they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, if what he's basically saying, if anyone thinks that they can brag about being a Christian, I have more. Okay? Can you imagine if I started a sentence like that? I come to church and be like, I'm going to tell you how awesome a Christian I am. And this is what he does. He says he was circumcised on the 8th day. This is like part of his spiritual credentials. And why that was important is that he was born into covenant obedience, exactly as the law required. So when Paul came out on the 8th day, he was circumcised like the law said he should have been. So he's like, look, I started out better than you. That's kind of what he's saying, right? Then he says, of the people of Israel, I was part of the people of Israel, which means that he's ethnically and nationally part of God's chosen people. He's not some Gentile that came to Christ later. He was like, I'm the OG, okay? That's what he's saying in our language. He's like, I was the original part of Israel, okay? So there's two things, circumcised on the 8th day, and I'm part of Israel. Then he says, and I come from the tribe of Benjamin. How many tribes are there? 12, good. And if you remember, the kingdom split. 10 tribes went to the north, and 2 tribes went to the south. The 2 that went to the south were Benjamin and, anyone know? Judah. Very good. You guys disciple grads, right? Benjamin and Judah went to the south, right? And he's saying, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. Why is that important? Because we are a respected, historic tribe. We were the tribe of Israel's first king, which was who? First king was Saul. Very good. And we remained faithful to Judah. We weren't part of the 10, we were part of the 2. So he's saying, I come from that tribe. That's how good I am, okay? Then he says, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. He's saying I'm culturally and religiously pure, meaning that he was raised in this traditional Jewish faith and its practice. He wasn't like compromised in any way or didn't have any false doctrines. And then he says, in regard to the law, I was a Pharisee. Pharisees held to the strictest interpretation of the law. This is why Jesus had such a problem with them, remember? Because they created the 10 commandments. Then they took all of the law and the Torah, or the Torah and the prophets, and they came up with 613 commandments to follow. Now you thought the 10 commandments were hard, right? We can't even keep the 10. They created 613, and Paul said, I was, in regards to the law, I was a Pharisee, meaning I was part of the strictest, most disciplined group that obeyed the law to the T, that we kept it and we interpreted it properly. And then he says, as for zeal, I persecuted the church, meaning that his passion for defending Judaism was so intense that he literally hunted down people who weren't living properly. Now we know this is true, right? Because in the book of Acts, what do we find? Where's Paul? What is he doing? What he saw at this point? Remember what he oversaw in Acts chapter 9? He was persecuting the Christians. He was finding out where the Christians were, because the Christians weren't Jews. They weren't Judaism. They were this new sect of like faith, and they're following this crazy carpenter son and this guy Jesus who's making all these claims, and Paul's like, we're not having it. This is not Judaism. So he found out if you were a Christian, you were a follower of the way, is what they called it. And he hunted them down, and he literally had them arrested, or in one case we know that he had someone killed. Remember who that was? Stephen. Stephen was killed, and Saul, it says literally there that as Stephen was stoned to death for being a Christian, Paul stood right there and oversaw the whole thing. So he's saying in his spiritual resume, as for zeal, I persecuted the church, and as for righteousness based on the law, I was faultless. Now, can you say that? I mean, could you stand up before a crowd of people and be like, you know the Bible? I live it perfectly. Would anyone have the audacity to do that? I'm not going the second sentence and I've already broken the commandments, like that's what Paul's saying. He's giving us this background that if anyone could claim there was a spiritual credential that proved that they were better than anyone else, Paul's like, it was me. I got the background, I got the heritage, I got the parents, I got the circumcision, I came from the right tribe, I got it all. And he says at the end of that, all of that was rubbish. Talks about rubbish. And the reason I talk about this, because Paul is writing the book we're studying right now, right? The Ephesians. What is that? It's a letter, right? And who's it to? Do you remember? The church of Ephesus. Ephesus was the city. So we call it Ephesians, the book of Ephesians, but it's a letter to the church in Ephesus. And do you know where Paul wrote it from? From prison. From prison. And which city was he in? Do you know? He's in Rome. And he's on house arrest. Why is he on house arrest? Because he was preaching the gospel. He's preaching this Christianity that he once hunted down. Now he's arrested. He's on house arrest. And we know that he was allowed to have visitors. But we also know, under house arrest, guess who he was chained to? Literally chained to. A Roman soldier. Like, they didn't have ankle bracelets, right? The ankle bracelet was another dude. They tied Paul to the Roman soldier. So as Paul's writing this letter in Rome, under house arrest, chained to a Roman soldier, to this church in Ephesus, he's using these concepts, and he's talking about their armor. Why do you think it's on his mind? Because he's staring at it. I mean, can you imagine being chained to somebody? Like, I don't mean marriage. I mean like literally being chained to somebody. But if I'm chained to Adria all day long, and her armor's moving around, and I mean, you got to know someone, right? So Paul's chained to this soldier, and this soldier would be wearing a helmet, a belt, breastplate, shield, all the things. So I think Paul is literally staring at this dude all day, thinking about all the attacks he's been under, thinking about the spiritual warfare that he's in, and he's trying to encourage this church in Ephesus, because it's a church that he started, but he's now away from them. So he's writing this letter. So I think he's penning all this to say, hey, put on the armor, because I think he watches this guy put on his armor, and he's trying to make that connection with that. We talked about it in the first week. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I think two things are going on. I think when Paul's talking about this breastplate and this armor, he's thinking of two things. He's thinking of the soldier right next to him, and because he's an expert in the law, he would have literally memorized the entire Old Testament and most of the prophets, the writings. And I think Paul would have been thinking, as a Jew, as a good Jew who knew his Bible, Isaiah chapter 59. And Isaiah chapter 59, in fact, can someone pull it up on their, do you have a Bible or your app or something? Someone got it? Isaiah 59. If you have it, look it up wherever you are, because it's important for our discussion. But Isaiah 59 verses 16 and 17. Who's got it? Who's got it in the NIV or some easy to read? Isaiah 59 verses 16. What does it say?
He was amazed to see that no one intervened, helped the oppressed, so he himself stepped in to save them with his strong arm and his justice sustained.
Okay, so stop there. So it says, in the translation I have, it says that the Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. So there's a situation going on that justice is not happening. God's looking at it, and he's displeased by it because he wants to see justice, and there's no justice. So what does he do then? He saw that there was none. And what does it say he did?
He himself stepped in to save them with his strong arm and his justice sustained.
Okay, so in the version that I have, it says that he saw that there was no one to do justice, and he was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So what does God do? With his own arm and with his own righteousness, he puts on this armor as his breastplate. That imagery that Isaiah is talking about God himself, I think Paul is literally going back to Isaiah with that imagery, and then he's next to a Roman soldier, and he's putting it together, because the righteousness that is put on the breastplate, the Bible says, Amanda, whose righteousness is it? His.
Yeah.
Who's his? God. It's God's righteousness that he puts on as a breastplate, as I'll put it in our language, as Kevlar. If I say Kevlar, you know what I mean, right? A bulletproof vest. That's what a breastplate was. It was Kevlar. It was their armor to protect them from the arrows or protect them from the weaponry. So the implication is it's like a piece of clothing, right? If I were to say to you, I'm going to put on a Kevlar jacket, you would understand I'm talking about clothing. I'm putting on this impenetrable suit. And what Paul's talking about is that the Kevlar is God's righteousness. And that's important because when we go to this passage, he's not saying you should get armor yourself. He's saying you have armor already. And whose is it? It's God's armor. He used it for himself. He's now made it available to you. And what should you do with it? You should put it on. You should put it on. He's talking in those terms. So here's the thing. There's actually two types of righteousness that exists out there. And that's what we want to talk about in a second. There's two types of righteousness. I just mentioned one of them, which is what? God's righteousness. There's another righteousness. What is it? Is it? Yeah. What is it?
Man's.
Yeah, we call it self-righteousness. Does anyone ever know anybody who's self-righteous? We love those people, don't we? They're lovely. Yeah, there's a self-righteousness, and then there's God's righteousness. So let's go back to the garden for a minute. Adam and Eve. They ate of the fruit from the tree they shouldn't have, right? They immediately realized they were naked. What's the first thing that they did? They covered themselves with what? Fig leaves. Super comfortable. Why'd they do that? They're ashamed. They realized they were guilty. They realized that shame came with it. They realized we're in big trouble, and we have to work in a way ourselves to fix this. It's a version of self-righteousness, right? Because they got to fix this mess. Does that fig leaf work? Does God find that acceptable? Why not? I mean, they're pulling themselves up by the bootstraps, right? They made this mess. They should fix it, right? The problem is self-righteousness doesn't actually work. There's actually two ways to get to heaven. Did you know that? Yeah, super controversial. The one way we all talk about is that trust Christ in his work, and we get there because of him, right? The other way we can all get to heaven literally is we live perfectly. How's that going? Because literally, if you were to live the law perfectly, I mean 100%, perfect people get to heaven. God would look and go, wow, you did it. You lived perfectly. Has anyone ever done it? No. Well, one. Who did it? Jesus. Jesus lived it perfectly and then died in our place so that we could, we put on his righteousness so that we don't have to do it ourselves because our righteousness won't work, will it? Do you ever find yourself creating a mess you can't fix? I use this illustration sometimes when I talk about Good Friday. We talk about Good Friday, and I use the image of a playpen. You ever put a baby in a playpen, right? When I put my son early on in a playpen, it was like summertime. He was just in a diaper, went away for a little bit, came back, diapers off, right? Bad, my bad. And diapers off, and he's holding this brown object that he found. And the brown object, he realized pretty quickly, I don't really want that. But he couldn't get it off him because every time he tried to get it off him, it spread. And then he realized, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. So he's trying to hide it. But then I come back and, I mean, you can't hide that, right? Even this best attempt to hide it, I could still smell it. It was his attempt of going, oh man, I made an absolute mess here and I need to fix it. He can't fix it. How do you fix it? Someone outside the playpen who is clean and different has to come in and fix it for him. And that's the two versions here between self-righteousness and God's righteousness. I called L. So I want to talk about for a minute, in your small groups, hope we have time. Yeah, we have time, good. I want you to talk about the difference between righteousness and God's righteousness and self-righteousness. And these are, I have it here, it says, you know you're drifting into self-righteousness when. What I want you to do is just talk about if any of these strike you. Some of these might be too personal. You may not want to talk about it in your group. But if you're willing, here we go. Here we go. Got some there. Talk about the difference between righteousness and self-righteousness and where you might fall on this category. And we'll talk about, maybe take 6-7 minutes. So this might be a little harder to talk about because you're getting to the heart of the matter for some things. But if you're willing, self-righteousness creeps up a lot, especially in church, right? It just does. I mean, I've been in this business a long time. I've seen it. I've experienced it personally, where self-righteousness takes over. You forget what you're doing. You forget you're in this business. I think about dancing. Anybody ever go dancing, take dance classes, or I don't mean break dancing, Bobby. I mean like, okay, you wish. Yeah, so dancing places. I think there's a Fred Astaire dancing company not too far. A friend of mine named Marie, she does ballroom dancing. She's told me about. Have you ever watched? If you're not anyone a natural dancer? All right, Bobby, very good. You were a teacher, okay. So this will resonate with you. But I think about dancing when I think about this whole conversation of righteousness and self-righteousness, God's righteousness and self-righteousness. When you don't know what you're doing or you're trying to dance, where do you often look at? Your feet, right? So you're with a partner. And you're doing a lot of this. Don't step there. Okay, step there. We have come in this way. I should go this way. Well, the Bible says I need to step here, but I need to know I keep. And that's one form of dancing, I guess. I think that's a picture of what self-righteousness looks like. Is you're constantly aware of I should step here and I shouldn't step there. But really good dancers, what are they looking at? Yeah, I mean they're. If you've seen a really good dancer, they're so connected, them and their partner, they can look at each other, they can look whatever, because they are just one flawless flowing movement. You ever see dancing like that? I can't do that, you know. And that to me it's a picture because it's not about where you're supposed to step, because if you're looking at your feet, you're not really dancing, you're just following steps, right? And I think that's a picture of what a lot of people live their Christian walk. It's about the do's and the don'ts. It's about the list. I have a list. I gotta read my Bible. I gotta pray. I gotta serve. I gotta tithe. We have these things. If we can do this formula, check. Boxes are checked, I'm good, right? A lot of people live that way. Where I think, if you look at the dancing analogy, God is more interested in say, hey, dance with me. Don't look at the feet. Look at me, and I will lead. And as I lead, wherever your feet go, where do they move? They go exactly where they need to be, because you're focused on the person. You're not focused on the feet. Does that make sense? And to me, that's a perfect illustration for this, because Paul, his previous life was what? He was perfect. He was a Pharisee. He was a Hebrew of Hebrews. He was from the right tribe. He did everything right. And at the end of it, what did he come to? He said to realize, I missed it. I missed it. Because he never encountered Jesus. He encountered the law, but he didn't understand grace. That make sense? So he's talking about this thing about self-righteousness because he's literally personally lived it. He's like, I know where this leads. It leads to a fig tree, a fig leaf. It doesn't lead to salvation. It leads to a bunch of rules that I follow. But at the end of the day, I can't actually have a relationship with God that way. It's just like with you and your whatever relationship you're in, right? It's not about the rules and the list. It's about falling in love with your partner or the people around you. And I think that's the idea behind it. So when you read this list, like, do you measure your week by spiritual productivity instead of faithfulness? I feel this a lot. I'll be honest. As a pastor, I feel this a lot. I have to be productive. And God never called me to be successful. He just called me to be faithful. I just have to show up and do what he's told me to do and let the results speak to him. And in church ministry, we feel this pressure that things have to grow. We have to have a big church. When you get around other pastors, we go to these conferences, and one of the first questions you ask is, how big's your church? And it's a subtle question. It's a really subtle question. I don't think necessarily anyone's meaning anything by it. But when you're in the presence of someone, you're like, how big's your church? Well, my church isn't as big. You start to feel like, well, maybe I'm not doing something right. When God says, I never called you to have a big church. I just called you to be faithful in your church. How about when you're uncomfortable when someone sins differently than you? We love our own sin. That one I can justify all day long. But if you come to me with a weird, Dan, come on, man. It's a weird sin. You ever watch that show? I don't know what it's called, but the people who eat weird things, like no, it's like My Strange Addiction. Do you ever watch that show? It's like a train wreck, right? But why are we attracted to that? Because we're like, we can judge those people. Like, you eat styrofoam? Like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, you know? Because it's not our thing. It's not our thing. It's easier. If you spend more time talking about what's wrong with the culture than what's wrong with you, or if someone interprets the Bible differently than you, or you find yourself saying things internally like, well, at least I'm not like that. I mean, it sounds a lot like the guy in the Bible where he raises his arm up and he says, God, I thank you that I'm not a sinner. You know, that's this self-right. That's what Jesus, when he came, he was so anti-self-righteousness because he says, you guys, I've provided for you everything you need. Just put that on. Instead, we spend all this time doing our own thing, trying to see if we can earn favor or win points that way. So let me finish with this. The breastplate, right? It covers a couple key organs. Why is the breastplate, why is this so important? What is it covering that's so vital? Your heart? How big's your heart? I mean, how important is it? It's everything, isn't it? One shot to the heart and you're done. See, this breastplate, it covers the vitals. I mean, if any one of these, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the stomach, and you see those vessels, the blood vessels? How big are they? How important are they? Aorta, have you ever heard of it? Yeah, you'll bleed out so fast. So Paul's saying, he's doing two things. He's saying this breastplate covers you physically, but he's also saying that this breastplate, he's talking about it in spiritual terms, it covers you spiritually. What does the Bible say about the heart in the Bible? What does it talk about? Is the heart mentioned in the Bible at all spiritually? It says it's everything, isn't it? Out of the heart, it says to guard your heart, for out of it is the wellspring of life. I mean, the heart is everything. The heart is the center of our spiritual life. And the symbolism here is Paul saying, make sure that you have God's covering over it, not your own. How about the lungs? Are they pretty important? One of the first memories I have as a kid, I was 5 years old, sitting on the floor by the couch. My dad was asleep. My biological dad, he had caught pneumonia on a hunting trip. He's taking a nap. While I was playing at his feet, I heard his lung collapsed. If you've ever heard that sound, you'll never forget it. I realized something was wrong. I ran in the other room to get my mom. And while I was in the other room, we both heard the second lung collapse. And by the time I got back, he was gone. I know the importance of the lung. In the scripture, the lung is about breath, right? What's the first thing we see in Adam and Eve? When he formed Adam, what did he do? He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So lungs are everything. That's why it gets me so upset when I see kids vaping and smoking. Because I'm like, you're putting things in your lungs that were never meant to be there. So the lungs are important. How about the liver? What does the liver do? Removes toxins, right? Are there toxins in our spiritual walk that we need to be removed? Yeah. Years ago, I was traveling. I was a salesman. Every Thursday, I'd get on a plane and I'd fly somewhere in the country, and I'd work Friday, Saturday, Sunday at some trade show, and I'd fly back Sunday night. And oftentimes, I don't know what night it was, but I'd get to the hotel room, and back then Sopranos was on. Remember that show, Sopranos? Tells you how old I am. And Sopranos is about like this mafia family, right? And I had never seen a show of it before, so I'm in a hotel room, I turn on Sopranos and I watch it, and it was really good. Like, it was so well done, so well written. It was really like real to life apparently and all that. So I found myself every weekend I'm in a hotel room, and the Sopranos kept coming on every night that I was in this hotel room, so I just kept watching it. And I got super engaged into this whole story, right? And then I started to realize, oh my gosh, this is not good for me to be feeding myself with. This is a lot of bad, like, this is the mafia, right? And so I had to quit because it was a toxin that was in going on. I'll just finish with this. How about blood vessels? What does the Bible say about blood? Is blood a theme in the Bible? It talks about blood in Leviticus. Blood is your very life stream. So when we talk about righteousness, I hope this imagery helps you, that put on God's righteousness, not your own righteousness. And if you struggle with, hey, I'm falling into like self-righteousness, you're not alone. You're not alone. But help recognize that God never intended you to dance that way. He intended you to fall in love with Him and not have to worry about where your feet are. So let's pray. I know we got to run. God, we're grateful for your word here and for what it teaches us. Help us to not be self-righteous. Help us to put on your righteousness. Help us to remember the imagery of this breastplate and this belt of truth, that you're giving us everything we need in this spiritual armor, but it's our job to put it on. Help us to do that. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, y'all. Thank you.